The scratching at Elise Moreau's door came 3 times before she realized it wasn't the wind. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter against the winter cold seeping through the cottage walls, her breath misting in the frigid air that no amount of firewood could ever seem to banish. 6 months had passed since the council's judgment. 6 months since they had torn the healer's crest from her robes and driven her from the capital with nothing but the clothes on her back and shame burning in her chest like hot coals. The mountain cottage was meant to be her tomb, a slow death sentence disguised as mercy. No one survived winter this far north. No one was supposed to. The isolation was its own kind of execution, careful and quiet, with no blood on the royal council's hands. Just another Omega who couldn't handle the elements, they would say when spring came and her frozen body was discovered. A tragedy. A waste. Nothing more. The scratching came again, weaker now, accompanied by a sound that froze Elise's blood in her veins. A whimper, distinctly canine, but massive, carrying the resonance of something far larger than any ordinary wolf. She pressed her ear against the rough wooden door, her healer's instincts warring with survival sense. Nothing good came calling in blizzards. Nothing innocent sought refuge at the edge of the world where exiles went to die. Her fingers trembled as they touched the iron bolt. Logic screamed at her to step away, to let the door stay locked, to let whatever was out there meet the same fate the council had chosen for her. 6 months of isolation had taught her one brutal lesson. Survival meant keeping your head down, your door locked, your heart hardened against the cruelty of a world that had cast her aside like refuse. But when she finally cracked the door open, Elise's breath caught in her throat. A war dog collapsed across her threshold. Not just any war dog, but one bearing the silver and crimson collar of the king's personal guard, the sacred emblem that marked the elite protectors of the crown itself. Blood stained the snow beneath its massive body, steaming in the frigid air as the blizzard howled around them both. The creature's fur was matted with ice and gore, armor plates strapped to its shoulders dented and cracked from battle. But it was the swollen belly that made Elise's hands move before her mind could protest. This creature was heavily pregnant. "They sent you to die too," Elise whispered, recognizing the parallel in those intelligent amber eyes that met hers with desperate clarity. The war dog, a female she could see now, raised her head with tremendous effort. In those eyes, Elise saw the same desperate plea she had once made to the council, the same words that had fallen on deaf ears while Lord Castellan Drake watched with cold satisfaction. Save them. Whatever it costs, save them. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Elise stood frozen in the doorway. The wind tore at her hair, snowflakes stinging her face, the fire behind her guttering in the sudden draft. She thought of the trial. Thought of standing before the council in iron chains, begging them to spare the innocent Omega mothers whose only crime was carrying children with gifts the council feared. Thought of Drake's voice, smooth as poisoned honey, pronouncing her guilty of sedition, of spreading dangerous ideas, of daring to suggest that Omegas with lunar-touched gifts were being silenced rather than celebrated. She had failed those mothers. Their screams still haunted her sleep on the nights when exhaustion finally dragged her under. She would not fail this one. Elise dropped to her knees in the snow, ignoring the ice biting through her thin nightgown, and gripped the war dog's armored collar. The creature was impossibly heavy, easily 300 pounds of muscle and bone and the weight of whatever she carried in her womb. Elise pulled with strength she didn't know she possessed, desperation lending power to her Omega frame that everyone had always called weak, useless, inferior. She dragged the war dog inside inch by agonizing inch, her muscles screaming, her bare feet slipping on the wooden floor now slick with melting snow and blood. When she finally got the creature fully across the threshold, Elise slammed the door shut and threw the bolt home, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage the simple motion. The war dog's breathing was labored, each exhale a rattling wheeze that spoke of internal damage. Elise's healer training took over, pushing past fear and doubt. She needed light, supplies, answers. Her hands moved to the creature's neck, searching for a pulse point beneath the thick fur and armor straps. The moment her fingers made contact with bare skin, the world exploded into fire and ice. Elise gasped as images flooded her mind, not her own, rushing in with the force of a river breaking through a dam. She saw through amber eyes, felt the phantom pain of poison burning through veins, heard a voice that wasn't hers echoing in her skull. Moonmarked. You're the one. The prophecy spoke true. Elise jerked her hand back, stumbling away from the war dog, her heart hammering against her ribs. That voice had been inside her head. Clear as spoken words, but intimate in a way that made her skin prickle with recognition she couldn't name. The war dog, impossibly, began to shift. Bones cracked and reformed with sounds that made Elise's stomach turn. For reseated, armor plates clattering to the floor as the body beneath them changed shape. In less than 30 seconds, where a massive canine had lain bleeding, now sprawled a woman. Tall, muscular, her skin marked with scars that spoke of decades of battle. She wore the remains of a royal guard uniform beneath the armor, and her hair, of a rich auburn streaked with silver, was matted with blood and ice. But it was her face that Elise recognized with a jolt of pure terror. Brune Ashford, the Alpha King's personal war dog. The most legendary shifter in the entire kingdom, bonded to the crown by lunar oath, sworn to die before allowing harm to touch the royal bloodline. And she was here in Elise's exile cottage, bleeding out on the floor. Please, Brune's voice whispered directly into Elise's mind, their connection still open and raw. Don't be afraid. I came because you're the only one who can save them. Elise's throat was too dry to speak. She managed a single word, barely audible. How? Brune's eyes, amber and far too knowing, held hers. Because you carry the gift they tried to bury. Lunar healing. The blood magic that can mend what silver destroys. Silver. Elise's gaze dropped to the dark veins spreading beneath Brune's skin, visible through her pale flesh like ink seeping through parchment. She knew that pattern. Had seen it once in her training before they'd stripped her of her robes and her future. Silver nightshade poisoning. Her blood turned to ice. Silver nightshade didn't grow in the wild. It couldn't be harvested accidentally. It was a weapon, carefully cultivated, accessible only to those with royal clearance. Only the council had access to it. Only those in the highest seats of power. Someone on the royal council had poisoned the Alpha King's personal war dog. This wasn't a random attack. This was assassination. Why? Elise breathed, her mind reeling. Why would they poison you? Brune's hand moved to her swollen belly, protective and desperate. Because of what I carry. The pups. They're not ordinary shifters. They're moonlit, born during the triple moon alignment. They'll have the gift to sense lies, to reveal traitors with a single look. Understanding crashed over Elise like a frozen wave. Someone on the council was afraid of being exposed. Afraid enough to kill the king's most loyal guardian and her unborn children. Afraid enough to make it look like the pregnancy had simply gone wrong, like Brune had wandered into the mountains and died of natural causes far from help. And they'd sent her here, to the one place where an exiled Omega healer lived. The perfect scapegoat if anyone ever questioned the circumstances. I can't shift back without help, Brune continued, her mental voice growing weaker. The poison locks my form. I'm trapped like this, and the pups need to be born during the alignment. 3 days from now. If they're born before then or after, they'll die. And if they die, the truth dies with them. Elise's hands were shaking again, but not from cold this time. She looked at Brune, at the poison spreading through her system, at the belly that held 3 lives whose only crime was being able to see through lies. She thought of the Omega mothers she couldn't save, the ones who'd been disappeared because their children showed gifts the council deemed too dangerous. She'd been powerless then, chained and silenced and cast aside. But she wasn't chained anymore. I'll help you, Elise said, and felt the words settle into her bones like an oath. Whatever it takes. Relief flooded through their mental connection, so profound it brought tears to Brune's eyes. Thank you. The moon goddess chose well. Elise moved to gather her supplies, what little she had left after 6 months of rationing. Bandages. Herbs. Water from the well that hadn't frozen yet. Her hands worked automatically while her mind raced through everything she knew about Silver Nightshade. It was slow-acting, designed to look like natural illness. Brune had days, maybe a week before it reached her heart. But birthing the pups would accelerate it. The strain on her body, The shift required to deliver them safely, it would push the poison through her system like fire through dry wood. Elise was binding Brune's worst wounds when she felt it. A prickling at the base of her skull, the same sensation she used to get in the capital when someone was watching her with ill intent. She moved to the window, careful to stay in the shadows, and peered out through a gap in the shutters. Fresh tracks in the snow. Multiple sets, coming from the tree line. Not animal tracks. Human. Or shifter in human form. They spread out in a pattern she recognized from her time treating soldiers, the kind of formation used when surrounding a target. When preparing to move in for a kill. Elise's breath caught in her throat as understanding crystallized into terrible clarity. "They didn't send you here to hide," she whispered, turning back to Brune. "They sent you here to die. And they sent hunters to finish the job." Brune's eyes met hers, and in them Elise saw the same knowledge. The same grim acceptance. Before either of them could speak, glass shattered. An arrow punched through the window, embedding itself in the wooden beam above Elise's head with a solid thunk that made her ears ring. The siege had begun. The arrow quivered in the wooden beam, its fletchings still trembling from impact. Elise dropped to the floor, her heart slamming against her ribs hard enough to bruise. Another arrow punched through the window, then another, shattering what remained of the glass and sending shards scattering across the floor like deadly snow. "Get away from the window," Brune's voice commanded in her mind, urgent and strained. "They're not here to negotiate." Elise crawled across the floor, splinters biting into her palms, and pressed her back against the stone hearth. The fire behind her was dying, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Through the broken window, she heard voices, men shouting to each other in clipped military cadence. "Surround the structure. No one leaves alive." The reply came from a different direction. "What about the war dog? Burn it all. Make it look like the Omega's fire got out of control. Tragic accident. No witnesses." Elise's blood turned to ice. These weren't random attackers. They were organized, professional, following orders with the precision of trained soldiers. And they were willing to burn Brune alive, willing to murder an Omega exile without hesitation. She looked at Brune, still sprawled on the floor where she'd collapsed after shifting, her pregnant belly rising and falling with labored breaths. The poison veins had spread further, dark tributaries crawling up her neck toward her face. "How many?" Elise asked through their mental link, surprised at how steady her internal voice sounded despite the terror clawing at her throat. Brune's eyes closed, her enhanced senses reaching out. 6. Maybe 7. All shifters. Military training. They're not royal guard, but they're wearing the uniforms. Stolen or given." The front door shuddered under a heavy impact. Someone was testing its strength, preparing to break through. A voice called from outside, pitched to Carrie, dripping with false concern. "Omega Moro. We're here on royal orders to retrieve the war dog Brune Ashford. She's sick, confused. She wandered here by accident. Stand aside and you won't be harmed." Elise recognized the lie immediately. Real rescue wouldn't come with arrows through the window. Real rescue wouldn't arrive in the dead of night during a blizzard. Real rescue wouldn't speak of burning witnesses. She pressed herself flatter against the stone, her mind racing through options she didn't have. The cottage had one door, 2 windows, walls barely thick enough to keep out the wind. No weapons except kitchen knives. No way to fight off 6 trained shifter soldiers. Then Brune's body went rigid. Elise felt it through their connection a split second before Brune gasped aloud, her hands flying to her swollen belly. The triple moon alignment. It was beginning. "No," Elise breathed. "Not now. Not yet. You said 3 days." Brune's face contorted in pain, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. The stress accelerated it. The poison, the fear, my body knows we're out of time. A contraction rippled across Brune's abdomen, visible even through her torn uniform. She bit down on a scream, her teeth drawing blood from her lip. Elise could feel the pain echoing through their bond, could feel the pups inside Brune beginning to shift position, instinct driving them toward birth. The door shuddered again, harder this time. Wood cracked. Elise made a decision that would either save them or doom them both. She lunged across the room, grabbing the iron poker from beside the hearth and jamming it through the door handle, wedging it against the floor. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy them minutes. Then she turned to Brune, dropped to her knees beside her, and placed both hands on her swollen belly. "What are you doing?" Brune gasped between contractions. "Buying us time," Elise said, and reached for the gift she'd been forbidden to use. She'd been 8 years old when the lunar healing first manifested, her hands glowing silver as she'd healed a dying bird. Her mother had wept, not from joy but from terror, and had made Elise swear never to show anyone. Omega gifts were dangerous, her mother had said. The council feared what they couldn't control. Elise had kept that promise for 19 years. Until the trial, when she'd tried to use her gift to prove the Omega mothers could heal their own gifted children, that the council's fear was unfounded. They'd called her a liar, called the silver glow a trick of the light, and they'd exiled her for sedition. She called the power now, felt it wake in her blood like ice breaking in spring. Her hands began to glow, soft silver light spilling between her fingers and spreading across Brune's belly. It wasn't healing, not exactly. It was time. Slowing the contractions just enough, easing the pups back from the edge of too early birth, giving Brune's body a chance to stabilize. The door exploded inward. 3 men poured through, crossbows raised, faces hidden behind dark scarves. They wore Royal Guard uniforms, but Elise saw the wrongness immediately. The insignias were slightly off, the fabric too new. Costumes, not earned armor. The leader's eyes locked on Elise's glowing hands. His voice came out strangled. "She's using blood magic. Kill her first." Brune moved. Despite the poison, despite the pregnancy, despite everything, she moved with the speed and violence of the legendary warrior she was. Her shift was incomplete, her body caught halfway between human and wolf, bones cracking into new configurations even as she lunged. Claws erupted from fingertips that were too long, too curved. Her jaw extended, teeth sharpening into fangs. She caught the first attacker by the throat and tore it out before he could scream. Blood sprayed across the cottage walls, hot and copper-scented. The other 2 attackers stumbled back, shock freezing them for the single heartbeat Brune needed. She spun, her half-shifted body moving with terrible grace, and raked claws across the second man's chest. His armor split like paper. But the 3rd attacker recovered, his crossbow swinging toward Brune's exposed belly. Elise didn't think. She threw herself forward, the silver light still pouring from her hands, and slammed into Brune's side. The bolt meant for Brune's stomach caught Elise in the shoulder instead, punching through muscle and scraping bone. Pain whited out her vision. She heard herself scream, heard Brune roar in fury, heard the wet sounds of claws meeting flesh. When her sight cleared, all 3 attackers lay dead or dying, and Brune was collapsing beside her, the incomplete shift reversing as her strength failed. The contraction hit again, harder this time, unstoppable. "The first pup is coming," Brune gasped, her eyes wide and terrified. "Now. I can't stop it." Elise's shoulder was on fire, blood soaking through her nightgown, but she forced herself to focus. She'd delivered babies before, back when she was still a healer in the capital. Human babies. Never a shifter, never during a triple moon alignment, never while bleeding from a crossbow wound and surrounded by corpses. She crawled to Brune's side, positioned herself, and reached for her gift again. The silver light came easier this time, pouring from her hands like water. She pressed her glowing palms to Brune's belly and felt the pup inside, felt its tiny heartbeat, felt the lunar magic that already sang in its blood. "Push," Elise commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Brune pushed. The cabin door, still hanging broken on its hinges, suddenly filled with more bodies. For more attackers, these ones not bothering with pretense. They rushed in with blades drawn, faces set with murderous intent. Elise's hands were occupied, slick with blood and birth and silver light. She couldn't defend. Couldn't run. Could only keep working, keep pulling the pup toward life while death closed in around them. Then something inside her broke. Not broke. Shattered. Like a dam that had been holding back a flood for her entire life, suddenly giving way under pressure it was never meant to contain. Pain ripped through Elise's body, starting in her chest and radiating outward with the force of lightning striking bone. Her spine arched, every vertebra popping and reforming. Her hands, still glowing silver, began to change. fingers elongating, nails sharpening into claws that gleamed like moonlight on snow. "No," she tried to say, but her voice came out as a growl that shook the cottage walls. The attackers froze, their weapons lowering slightly as they stared at her. One of them whispered a word Elise had only ever heard in ancient texts. Lunar white. She felt her bones reshaping, felt muscle and sinew sliding into new configurations. Her nightgown tore as her body expanded, growing larger, stronger, taking a form she'd never worn but somehow recognized as deeply as her own name. Silver white fur erupted across her skin, each hair glowing with the same light that had poured from her hands. Her face elongated into a muzzle. Her teeth became fangs. Her ears shifted higher, more pointed. And her eyes, she could feel them changing, turning from brown to pure silver that cast their own light in the dim cottage. The transformation took seconds. When it finished, Elise stood on 4 legs, her head nearly touching the cottage ceiling, her body a massive wolf of purest white that seemed to be carved from moonlight itself. She'd never shifted before. Omegas weren't supposed to have strong wolf forms. They were supposed to be small, weak, barely able to hold the shift for more than minutes. But Elise wasn't small. She was enormous, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd ever seen. And she felt strong. Powerful. Like she'd been wearing chains her entire life and only now realized she could break them. The 4 attackers didn't run. They were trained soldiers and they attacked. Elise met them with violence she didn't know lived in her blood. Her jaws closed on an arm, crushing bone. Her claws raked across a chest, tearing through armor and flesh alike. She moved with instinct that felt older than memory, her body knowing how to fight even though her mind had never learned. When she exhaled, silver light poured from her mouth like breath made visible. When her paws hit the floor, the cottage wards that had been carved into the foundation stone, simple protection spells meant to keep out wind and animals, exploded outward in a shockwave of raw lunar power. The remaining attackers were thrown back, smashing through what was left of the door and tumbling into the snow outside. The shockwave rippled through the forest, and Elise felt it travel, felt it pulse outward like a beacon burning in the night. Behind her, Brune screamed. Elise spun, her massive wolf body moving with surprising grace in the confined space. She shifted back to human form without thinking about it, the transformation reversing as quickly as it had come. One moment she was a giant white wolf, the next she was kneeling naked and shaking beside Brune, her hands once again glowing with silver light. The first pup slid into her waiting hands. It was tiny, barely larger than her palm, its fur the same auburn as Brune's hair. But its eyes, when they opened, glowed with soft golden light. Moonlit. Just as Brune had said. Elise cleaned the pup's nose and mouth, felt it draw its first breath, heard its first tiny cry. She placed it on Brune's chest, and the war dog's arms came up to cradle it, tears streaming down her face. 2 more, Brune gasped. I can feel them. More footsteps outside, running through snow. Voices shouting. Elise couldn't tell if they were more assassins or something else. Didn't matter. She turned back to Brune, pressed her glowing hands to the woman's belly, and reached for the second pup. The next 2 births came faster, as if the first had opened a path. A male with silver fur, eyes glowing blue. A female with black fur marked with white, eyes glowing green. 3 pups, 3 different colors, 3 different colored glows to their gaze. All 3 moonlit. All 3 able to see truth itself. Elise placed the last pup with its siblings, watched them instinctively begin to nurse from their exhausted mother. Brune's eyes were half closed, her body trembling with shock and blood loss and the poison still working through her system. But she was alive. And her children were alive. Elise became aware of 3 things simultaneously. She was naked, covered in blood both hers and others, surrounded by corpses. The crossbow bolt still jutted from her shoulder, though the wound had somehow stopped bleeding. And someone very large was approaching the cottage, moving with purposeful speed through the trees outside. She felt him before she saw him. Felt the pull in her chest, an invisible cord drawing tight, connecting her to something, someone, moving toward her through the darkness. The bond she'd always been told Omegas would feel when they met their alpha. But Elise had never felt it before. Had assumed it was a myth, A story told to keep Omegas hoping for salvation that would never come. The bond was real, and it was singing in her blood like a struck bell. A massive black wolf exploded through the destroyed doorway, snow flying from its fur, amber eyes blazing with light that rivaled the moon. It was larger even than Elise's white wolf form had been, muscles rippling under midnight fur, each movement speaking of deadly grace and absolute power. The Alpha King, Lucien Valmont. He shifted mid-stride, his wolf form collapsing inward and reforming into a man who stood well over 6 feet, his body a map of scars earned over decades of battle. He wore simple traveling clothes, torn in places from his run through the forest. His hair, black streaked with silver, fell past his shoulders. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges, handsome in the way a blade is handsome. But it was his eyes that held Elise frozen. Amber, intense, locked on her with recognition that made her soul ache. The bond, he breathed, his voice rough as gravel, deep as thunder. You're the moon-marked Omega. Elise couldn't speak. Could only kneel there, naked and bloody, holding the gaze of the most powerful alpha in the kingdom while his war dog lay exhausted at her feet with 3 newborn pups at her breast. Lucien's gaze swept the cottage, took in the dead assassins. The broken door. The shattered window. The blood painting the walls. His expression went from shock to cold fury in the space between heartbeats. My king, Brune's weak voice drew his attention. They tried to kill your legacy. Lucien crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside Brune. His hands, large and scarred, touched her face with surprising gentleness. Brune. What happened? Poison, Brune whispered. Silver nightshade. Someone on the council ordered it. Sent assassins to finish me. To kill the pups before they could be born. Elise watched Lucien's jaw clench, watched his hands curl into fists. She could feel his rage through the bond, could feel it burning like wildfire barely contained. But when he looked at the 3 tiny pups nursing at Brune's chest, his expression softened. Moonlit, he said quietly. The prophecy was true. Brune's eyes closed. Not just the prophecy about them, my king. About her. Lucien's gaze swung back to Elise, and she felt the weight of it like a physical thing. She was suddenly, painfully aware of her nakedness, of the blood covering her skin, of the crossbow bolt still embedded in her shoulder. She wanted to cover herself, to look away, but found she couldn't move. You shifted, Lucien said, and it wasn't a question. I felt it. Felt the shockwave from miles away. Felt the bond snap into place like it had been waiting my entire life. Elise found her voice, though it came out hoarse and shaking. I didn't know I could. They told me I was weak. That Omegas couldn't have strong wolf forms. His expression twisted into something between anger and pain. They lied to you. He gestured at the cottage, at the destruction, at the dead assassins. This is not weakness. More footsteps outside, multiple sets, moving with military precision. Elise's body tensed, preparing to shift again, to fight if needed. Lucien held up a hand, his enhanced hearing catching something she couldn't. Wait. Then louder, calling out the door, identify. Royal Guard, Alpha King, came the response. Lord Castellan Drake with reinforcements. We tracked the disturbance here. Elise's blood turned to ice at that name. Drake. The same Drake who had presided over her trial. The same Drake who had watched her exile with satisfaction in his cold eyes. The same Drake who, she now realized with sick certainty, had access to Silver Nightshade. Lucien's expression went carefully blank. Come in, Drake. Let's discuss what you found. The Lord Castellan entered with 6 guards at his back, all in full uniform, all armed. Drake himself was tall and lean, his graying hair pulled back in a tight knot, his face a mask of concern that didn't reach his ice-blue eyes. Your Majesty, Drake said, placing a hand over his heart in formal greeting. Thank the moon goddess we found you. He gestured at Elise with barely concealed disdain. This Omega is clearly delusional. She's used blood magic on your war dog, probably drove her mad. We should execute her immediately before she does more damage. Before Lucien could respond, before Elise could defend herself, the 3 newborn pups began to glow. Their eyes, already luminous, brightened until they cast shadows across the cottage. The golden glow from the first pup, the blue from the second, the green from the third, They pulsed in unison like heartbeats made visible. Then the air above them shimmered. Elise gasped as images appeared, projected somehow from the pup's eyes onto the space above their tiny heads. Not simple images. Memories. Someone else's memories, pulled from their mind and made visible for everyone to see. She saw Drake standing in a private chamber, speaking to a hooded figure. Saw him hand over a vial of dark liquid. Heard his voice, cold and calculating. The war dog must die before the pups are born. If they live, if they manifest the gift, they'll expose everything. All our careful work. All our plans. The hooded figure's voice in the memory. And the Omega exile? Drake's response. Blame her. Say she used blood magic to drive Brune mad. 2 problems solved. The pups die, the Omega dies, and we maintain control. The images continued. Drake meeting with corrupt council members. Drake ordering the theft of Royal Guard uniforms. Drake planning, in meticulous detail, the murder of innocent newborns and the framing of an exiled healer. Decades of corruption spilled into the cottage air. Bribes. Blackmail. The systematic silencing of gifted Omegas whose powers threatened the council's control. The mothers Elise had tried to save disappeared on Drake's orders. The children taken and killed before they could manifest abilities that would challenge the established order. All of it visible. All of it undeniable. All of it broadcast by 3 newborn pups whose only gift was to see through lies and show the truth. The vision faded, the glow dimming back to the soft luminescence in the pups' eyes. They settled back to nursing, apparently unconcerned with the bombshell they'd just dropped. The silence in the cottage was absolute. Drake's face had gone white, then red, then a sickly gray. His guards were staring at him with horror and disgust, their hands moving away from their weapons as if touching them might contaminate them with his treason. Lucien stood slowly, his movements controlled, precise. When he spoke, his voice was soft. Soft in the way a blade is soft sliding into flesh. Drake. The Lord Castellan took a step back, then another. Your Majesty, I can explain. Those visions are tricks, blood magic manipulation, you can't possibly believe. Lucien's command hit like a physical force. Kneel. Drake's legs buckled against his will, the alpha command overriding every instinct. He crashed his knees in the bloody snow, his face a mask of rage and fear. Lucien looked at his guards. Bind him. Silver. He's going to trial. The guards moved instantly, producing silver chains that would prevent any shifter from transforming. As they wrapped the chains around Drake's wrists and throat, the disgraced Lord Castellan's eyes found Elise. She's Omega, he spat, venom in every word. Her word means nothing. You can't possibly trust her over me, over the council, over. Elise stood. The movement drew every eye in the cottage. She was still naked, still covered in blood, the crossbow bolt still jutting from her shoulder. She looked like a victim. Like prey. But when she spoke, her voice carried the same command that Lucien's had, the same authority that had been suppressed and denied her entire life. I'm not asking for your acceptance, Drake. I'm not begging for the council to believe me. She took a step toward him, and he flinched. I'm taking what was stolen from me. What was stolen from every Omega you silenced. Every mother you murdered. Every child you killed to protect your power. She felt her eyes shift, felt them turn silver again, felt the lunar power rising in her blood like a tide answering the moon's call. You exiled the wrong woman. Lucien was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Something that made the bond between them sing louder, pulling tighter. He turned to his guards. Take him to the capital. Maximum security. I want every member of the council present when I return. He looked back at Elise, then at Brune and the pups. And send healers. Real ones. The best we have. Then, while his guards were dragging a protesting Drake out into the snow, while Brune was whispering gratitude through their mind link, while the pups nursed peacefully as if they hadn't just destroyed a conspiracy decades in the making, Alpha King Lucien Valmont did something no one in the cottage expected. He knelt. Not the forced kneel he'd commanded from Drake. This was deliberate, respectful, one knee on the blood-soaked floor, his head bowed. The moon goddess didn't choose a royal healer, he said quietly. She chose you to reset our pack's order. Elise's breath caught. She could feel every eye on her, every witness to this moment understanding the weight of what was happening. Lucian looked up, met her gaze, and extended his hand. Not as king to subject. Not as alpha to omega. But as alpha to true omega. As equal to equal. Brune's weak voice filled the silence. The prophecy wasn't about the pups surviving, my king. It was about her rising. Elise looked at Lucian's outstretched hand. Looked at Brune, alive because she'd chosen to help rather than turn away. Looked at the 3 pups, glowing softly, already changing the world just by existing. Looked at the dead assassins, the broken cottage, the crossbow bolt in her shoulder. She thought of the trial. Thought of the mothers she couldn't save. Thought of 27 years spent believing she was weak, useless, worth less than nothing. She thought of the white wolf she'd become, massive and powerful and everything they'd told her she could never be. She reached out and took Lucian's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. The bond flared between them, bright enough that Brune gasped, bright enough that the remaining guards turned away from the intensity. When Elise spoke, her voice was steady. You exiled the wrong woman. Now let me show you what the right one can do. Lucian stood, pulling her up with him, and for the first time in her life, Elise didn't feel small. Didn't feel weak. Didn't feel less than. She felt exactly what she was. What she'd always been, underneath the lies and the suppression and the chains. Powerful. The epilogue would come weeks later, in the Grand Council chamber where she'd once stood in iron chains. But this time, Elise stood in moon-marked healer robes, silver thread glinting in torchlight. The 3 pups, growing faster than normal shifter young, sat at her feet, their eyes still glowing softly. Lucian's voice rang through the chamber. Any who oppose the new order, step forward now. Silence answered him. The kind of silence that spoke of fear and respect and the understanding that the world had fundamentally changed. Half the council seats were empty. Their former occupants awaited trial in silver chains. Elise met the eyes of those who remained, saw some fear, some resentment, but also, in a few, hope. She smiled. The exile was over. The reckoning had just begun.